preparing to announce a permanent end to the Korean War after a 65-year ceasefire when the leaders of the two nations meet face-to-face next week. We have Team Fox coverage with the anchor of Special Report, Bret Baier, standing by. But first, let's go to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, who's traveling with the president in West Palm Beach, Florida. John.
Dana, good afternoon to you. In this news that South Korea and North Korea are talking about the idea of possibly burying a hatchet that has existed since the end, or at least the calling of a ceasefire at the end of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula, hit just as Larry Kudlow, the chief economic advisor, and Matt Pottinger, who is the president's point person on East Asia affairs at the NSC, were briefing the press. Shinzo Abe, who the president is going to meet with later this afternoon, has got some real concerns about a meeting between Kim Jong-un of North Korea and the president, worrying that when the president cuts some sort of deal to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, if that is possible, that Japan's interest may not be fully taken into account. Talks with Kim are clearly a big concern for a lot of players in the region, but Japan in particular. I asked Pottinger about that this afternoon. He said that Japan's security interests fall in line with America's national security interests. I also asked him how this idea of a peace deal between North Korea and South Korea could possibly change the calculation for the president's sit down with Kim Jong-un, which the president said would happen either in late May or early June. Here's what Pottinger said off camera.
He's staying in very close coordination and contact with President Moon, and at the level below the president's, there's probably a higher degree of coordination taking place than has ever taken place since the end of the Korean War. There'll be plenty of time to talk about the goals of that inter-Korean summit and how they might mesh with goals for President Trump's own.
One of the big concerns that Shinzo Abe has, that if the Korean Peninsula were denuclearized, that there might not be the need for such a big American footprint in the region, and that might reduce the security umbrella. But again, Pottinger said that Japan's security falls right in line with America's national security. So likely that Japan's security concerns will be taken into consideration. One other point that Pottinger made, there's a narrative coming out of Japan that this announcement of the possible Kim sit down with President Trump came as a surprise. Pottinger said as close as the United States is with Japan, he doesn't see how it could have been a surprise. Dana?
And then there's the other issue in Syria, and the White House. I'm curious what they're saying about the bipartisan war authorization bill in Congress. This came up before during the Obama administration, and it seems to have new legs now.
It does, because Senators Corker and Tim Kaine of Virginia, who are on the Foreign Relations Committee, have got a new draft authorization for the use of military force, which specifically lays out the president's authorities to go after groups like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, the Taliban, and ISIS, but doesn't specifically spell out what the president could do in a case like he did over the weekend in attacking Syria. The White House does not have an official position on the new AUMF, except to say this afternoon, Dana, that they are comfortable with the current AUMF. They think that it covers everything that the president would possibly need to do. So I guess that in a way is saying we don't need a new one, and therefore we don't support the new one. But the White House only saying this afternoon they're comfortable with authorities contained in the existing AUMFs.
All right, John Roberts, thank you. Now let's bring in Bret Baier, the anchor of Special Report. Lots of things to cover with you today. I'm glad you could be here. I think I wanted to start with the Trump-Abe summit that they're going to have in Mar-a-Lago here in about an hour. As John Roberts was reporting, of course, a lot of the work for these summits goes on beforehand. And what they try to do, these leaders, is to have something that they can announce that shows deeper ties, good relations. Listen to Larry Kudlow, the president's economic advisor. He was on Fox earlier today about this meeting.
President Trump and Prime Minister Abe get along quite well. It's going to be a lengthy discussion. It's going to be about the exclusions from the national security tariffs on steel. It's going to be about market opening initiatives by Japan. It's going to be about TPP will be on the conversation, China, North Korea. It's got a big agenda. Very important meeting coming up.
Indeed it is. And one of the things about this, Bret, is that trade discussions really are not just about buying goods and services and the selling of goods and services. It's about diplomacy and national security, and all these things are wrapped up into one today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, Dana, I interviewed Prime Minister Abe out in Japan on the president's trip out there, and they do have this relationship that transcends perhaps other leaders. They have a close relationship, close tie, and the trade issue is a huge one. You know, the TPP, you heard Larry Kudlow mention it there. The fact that the president and the administration is even considering trying to reopen or somehow restart negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership is really significant. Whether they're going to get there or not, yet to be seen. But what has happened in the wake of the U.S. pulling out of the TPP is that China has stepped in and filled the void for some of those trading partners. And you're right, it's all about diplomacy and how that all interacts in Asia.
Talk about diplomacy in Washington, actually, internal diplomacy, about James Comey. I sort of wonder if he's pretty much a man in Washington with no friends. And I guess he would probably have to get a dog. Listen to what he said today about himself and witnesses talking about their case in the public.
Normally, you don't want your witnesses out talking if they're going to have to testify later. The advantage in my circumstances, my testimony is locked down. And I testified in front of Congress extensively. I wrote memos. I wrote written testimony. And so long as I continue to tell the truth and don't start making stuff up that's inconsistent with that testimony, I don't see an issue.
So, Brett, James Comey would understand that about how that process works. But there is a concern that the members of Congress had been asking to see a lot of this material, and he hadn't provided it, but he was able to write about it in his book and then talk about it on lots of different newscasts.
And leak it to the New York Times through a friend who later was characterized as his attorney. The problem with this, and he's right, yes, a lot of his testimony was locked down, but what was not locked down was his perception of things. And to get in an interview and essentially encourage voters to vote against President Trump, that is potentially a problem for Robert Mueller, who is probably going to rely on the former FBI director's testimony, or at least perceptions during the investigation, as part of his investigation. There's a lot of things so far he has not been asked. I hope he doesn't, because April 26th, I'll be sitting down with James Comey, but we'll see what's left on the table by the time we get there.
It is interesting for somebody who has spent that much time in Washington and survived in Washington. You think of somebody like Rex Tillerson, right? He's not a creature of D.C., comes to D.C., doesn't like it. He doesn't even really try to basically to get ingrained into the system. And then you have James Comey, who is pretty much doing the opposite of winning friends and influencing people. He's like losing friends and annoying people along the way.
Right. You know, what's interesting is the perspective of how he's written this book and really how he's talked about it. It seems like he is trying to sell books to 50% of the country, and he's not effectively selling that 50% even, because his explanations about the Clinton investigation have what I've seen so far have roiled the left and have made them upset. So we'll see how this progresses, but there are a lot of unanswered questions still about that investigation.
Indeed. The Clinton team very angry at James Comey as well. All right, Bret Baier, thank you. Have a good afternoon.
We'll see you.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting a news conference after a major scare in the air for nearly 150 people on a Southwest Airlines plane this morning. Part of its engine broke loose and crashed through a window during a flight from New York to Dallas, forcing an emergency landing in Philadelphia. Julie Banderas joins us with more. Julie, what can you tell us?
Yeah, this is pretty much a worst nightmare for anyone who has ever gotten onto an airplane. A harrowing rescue, though, on top of all of this, aboard this Southwest Airlines flight, which was forced to make that emergency landing you mentioned in Philadelphia. Now, there are multiple reports. Witnesses actually saw a piece of shrapnel from an engine which exploded in midair, blow out a window. Then a female passenger was partially sucked out of the window hole before her fellow flyers scrambled to her rescue and pulled her back in. Now, the FAA says Flight 1380 landed at 11:20 a.m. after the crew reported damage to one of the aircraft's engines, as well as the fuselage and at least one window. Passengers are seen exiting the plane using air stairs. Passenger Marty Martinez shared some really alarming photos on Facebook, even briefly going live on Facebook while wearing an oxygen mask. Now, in his post, he wrote, "Engine exploded in the air and blew open window 3 seats away from me." He says the explosion injured a female sitting in the seat next to the window. Southwest Airlines saying the following in a statement: "We are aware that Southwest Flight 1380 from New York LaGuardia to Dallas Love Field has diverted to Philadelphia International Airport. The flight has landed at PHL, and we are in the process of gathering more information. The aircraft is a Boeing 737-700, and the flight has 143 customers and 5 crew members on board. Safety is always our top priority at Southwest Airlines, and we are working diligently to support our customers and crews at this time." Now, the plane departed from New York's LaGuardia Airport. Tracking data from FlightAware.com showed the flight was heading west over New York's southern tier before abruptly turning toward Philadelphia. The NTSB is sending a GO team to Philadelphia as we speak to investigate the incident and will be holding a press conference shortly. Meantime, the Philadelphia airport says a ground stop, which had been issued by the FAA for the planes on the ground as the investigation continues, has been suspended. So all flights are allowed to leave the airport. The investigation continues, Dana.
All right, Julie, thank you for that.
Sure.
Republicans hitching their wagons to middle-class tax cuts. Will they ride them to victory in November? Plus, as chemical weapons inspectors seek answers in Syria, the Pentagon is about to brief Congress on last week's missile attack, and some lawmakers are moving to rein in the president's war powers. It's tax day, and Republicans are banking on the massive middle-class tax cuts to keep control of the House in November. A new study finding 32% of all advertising on House and Senate races since January have mentioned taxes, up from 13% 2 years ago. Philip Stutz is a Republican strategist and the founder and CEO of Go Big Media, and Jammu Green is a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. Thanks for joining me today. Phil, I'll start with you. If you're a Republican running for office this year, of course, you've got some challenges, but really I can't think of a better message that the president and the leadership could have given the members of Congress to run on than these tax cuts.
I agree. And if you look at some of the polling, even some of the skewed Democratic polling, the tax cuts are resonating, and Trump in one of the recent polls was up 7 in handling the economy. There's sort of the unforeseen circumstances like the Mueller investigation and what comes of that, and so that's sort of the elephant in the room. But overall, it's really good. But I would have a warning for Republicans here. If you decide to put advertisements up this election cycle with Republican congressmen and women talking about the tax cut, that is a losing strategy. And they need to find voters in their districts that have been positively impacted by it so that they tell their story. Otherwise, it'll be a bloodbath.
All right. Well, we're giving communications advice. Good advice. Now, Jammu, I want to ask you, how do Democrats plan to counter this? The economy is good, and I have another poll here from NBC Wall Street Journal that 35% of people believe that Republicans are better equipped to handle the economy than Democrats. What is a Democrat to do in this situation heading into the midterm to sort of counter this?
Well, Dana, I think there are other numbers out there that show that this tax bill specifically is not polling well. Where Republicans may have seen a bump, the tax bill itself is not polling well. But look, it makes sense for Republicans to run with this. It's the only major piece of legislation they were able to pass when they control the White House, the Senate, and Congress. And this is the only period of time before Americans get really punched in the gut with, cuts to programs that are really important to them, Social Security, Medicare, before this impending trade war really impacts middle-class Americans. And the bottom line, before they realize that individual taxes are going to increase while corporations are going to continue to feel the weight of this tax bill. 80% of the impact of this tax bill going to corporations, going to the wealthiest amongst us.
The front page of the USA Today yesterday talking about that. Well, that's the both sides of that. But I wanted to also get your take on this. Look at the ad that Governor Rick Scott is running as he begins his bid to run for the Senate in Florida. Take a listen.
In Washington, they say term limits can't be done. That's nonsense. We don't work for them. They work for us.
All right, Phil, you live in Florida.
Yep.
You know Florida well. And this tax cut, the term limit message is the one that he wants to run on. I interviewed him last week when he first announced, and I said, I was kind of surprised, but as I understand it, it polls very well. But I wanted to ask you, you have somebody like Governor Scott. He's finishing his second term as governor, running against a 3-term senator, and they're talking about term limits. Is this going to work?
It does work because he's sort of seen as a reformed governor, or former governor. And the fact is that for the last 10 years, everybody that's run for office has said we've got to clean up Washington and we got to reform Washington. And it's all rhetoric. And so this is kind of putting your money where your mouth is by saying, I'm not sticking around. I actually am going to reform and then I'm getting out of there. It's actually a very authentic way to run. And I think.
Oh, I don't know if we're losing you there, Phil. We have a little communication issue there. Do I have Jamu still?
I'm here.
Okay, good. You're still there. And so then, hey, look, you're going to get the floor here. Do Democrats react in the same way, positively, to politicians who say, I want to run for office and that my main issue is term limiting myself?
Look, I think Americans in general react positive to it in this current political environment. But let's not be fooled or get it twisted. Rick Scott is a career politician himself. But this also makes sense. This message makes sense for him. There are Republicans around the country that are running scared and having to find unique ways of differentiating themselves, certainly moving away from any sort of messaging tied to Donald Trump. But when it comes down to it, they have an uphill battle. Democrats have won or flipped 39 seats since President Trump was elected.
But with that generic ballot lead for the Democrats shrinking, the Democrats probably can't take anything for granted. I'll give you the last word.
Well, they're definitely not. Here's the thing, on the down low, without the pomp and circumstance of it all, the Democratic Party has been investing in the infrastructure of states and organizing around the country. That's what's led to these 39 seats being flipped. That's what led to Democrats winning the U.S. Senate seat in Alabama with Doug Jones. And none of this is getting the type of attention that these shiny objects that President Trump is driving. But that's okay. I think that's a good thing.
I did note
that this
yesterday,
Democratic blue wave,
and part of the reason that the Republicans have done better in that generic ballot is that their voter registration is up to that infrastructure you're talking about. I'm sorry that we lost Phil Stutz. He's always a great guest, and Jamu, of course, we'll have you back as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Top Pentagon officials about to brief Congress on the Syria airstrikes as new questions are raised over President Trump's next move in the region. And have you done your taxes? Well, the IRS is having big problems with its website today. What this could mean for those rushing to file on time. Closed-door briefing on Syria is set to get underway on Capitol Hill. Defense Secretary James Mattis and Joint Chiefs Chair General Joseph Dunford expected to go over the strikes as Syrian state TV reports a team of inspectors have entered the town where the chemical attack took place. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, what do we expect to hear today from General Mattis?
Well, not much publicly, Dana. Those closed-door meetings in Congress are expected to kick off in about 10 minutes. First in the House at 2:30 and then before the full Senate at 4:30. They will be classified. Mattis was just asked about the Syria strikes at the start of his meeting with the Albanian defense minister here at the Pentagon before he headed up to Capitol Hill.
The French and the United Kingdom and the United States allies, all NATO allies, we work together to maintain the prohibition on the use of chemical weapons. And that's how we came together. That's why we came together.
Congress was notified by the Pentagon ahead of the strikes through secure channels, I'm told. This morning in Britain, the Prime Minister Theresa May defended her decision not to come to Parliament and ask permission ahead of the strikes.
There are also situations where coming to Parliament in advance would undermine the security of our operations or constrain the ability of our armed forces to act quickly and decisively.
For the second time since Saturday, the Syrian military thought it was under attack. Reports from the region Monday night claimed more missiles struck, this time at the Shayrat air base outside Homs, where the U.S. launched 59 missiles a year ago. Confusion ensued, showing just how jumpy the Syrian military is right now. Syrian state TV blamed Israel and the U.S. for an electronic attack, causing the false alarm. The Pentagon was forced to issue a denial last night. Fox News has learned deception did play a key role in the strike against Assad's chemical weapons facilities over the weekend, Dana.
And what about the international weapons inspectors we mentioned in the intro?
Well, they are finally on the ground in Douma. Syrian state TV reported today they entered the Syrian town where the apparent chemical weapon attack took place after several days of delays. Remember, those Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons inspectors were supposed to be on the ground in Douma on Saturday, but had to wait in Damascus for permission from the Syrian and Russian authorities. British Prime Minister Theresa May accused Syria and Russia of trying to cover up evidence of the chemical weapons used. What we know is chlorine dissipates quickly, so the more time that goes on, the more difficult to prove what chemical agents were used.
Indeed.
Dana.
All right, Jennifer, thank you. Starbucks will close locations nationwide for sensitivity training in the wake of an incident where 2 black men were arrested in Philadelphia last week. Police were called while the men were waiting for a friend inside the store. They were not charged. Protests have taken place outside the store every day since the incident. Starbucks says all 8,000 company-owned locations in the U.S. will close during the afternoon on May 29th. So do you shop online? Well, who doesn't? You may have to start paying sales tax on every online purchase, depending on what the Supreme Court decides. We're live with the details. Plus, she claims she had an affair with President Trump. Now the porn star is injecting even more drama into her story.
I'm tired of being threatened and intimidating me and trying to say that you'll ruin my life and take my, all my money and my house and whatever. I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done being bullied.
This is a collaborative, improvisational conversation about politics and life.
Everybody at The Five comes with a background and an expertise.
No one says news has to be boring. No scripts, nothing.
People love the show because we make them think.
And at 5 o'clock, you get the hard stuff and we dissect it up top. And then at the end of the show, we give you a little dessert.
We're telling you what we think. And we are speaking, it turns out, for a lot of people.
Multi-billion-dollar tax dispute involving online retailers with the Supreme Court now. Hearing arguments about whether internet merchants need to collect sales tax regardless of where they are located. About 36 states backing the suit. Garrett Tenney is live at the Supreme Court. Garrett.
Well, Dana, nobody likes to pay more than they need to when they're buying something. And for years, that is what made shopping online so attractive, in part because a lot of internet retailers don't charge sales tax. So that's why you can find items online for a little bit cheaper than you can at a physical store. So while that's good for us as customers, that can mean billions of dollars in lost tax revenue for the states. And the reason online retailers can do this is in 1992, the Supreme Court ruled that businesses can only be forced to collect sales tax in states they have a physical presence in. Now, South Dakota is asking the Supreme Court to overturn that precedent to create a level playing field for all businesses.
It's about the fact that that small business on Main Street is losing its sale. That's not fair, that's not right, and that should not be constitutionally sanctioned.
Lawyers for the online sellers Wayfair, Overstock, and Newegg, who were sued by South Dakota, are arguing that there are more than 12,000 tax jurisdictions across the country, and that forcing small businesses and startups to comply and to be able to collect those sales tax for all of those jurisdictions, that could cost too much and push them out of business.
I thought that it was a lively bench, and what I was especially pleased with was the fact that the questions from the justices really reflected an understanding of just how complex the crazy quilt of state sales and use tax laws are.
The Trump administration is backing South Dakota in this lawsuit, and while the justices did not reach any kind of consensus today, we are expected to have a decision on this, or ruling on this, before the end of June. Dana?
All right, Garrett, thank you.
You got it.
More on this now with Richard Rubin of the Wall Street Journal. Richard, you were there in the courtroom today at the Supreme Court. Did you hear any of the questions and that give you an indication where anyone was leaning?
Yeah, I think we got an indication that this is a court that's more divided on this issue than we might have thought going in. You had some justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg seemed to be siding in her questions with South Dakota. You can never exactly tell with justices exactly which way they're leaning. She seems to be leaning that way. Justice Kennedy had basically invited this case to overrule that 1992 precedent. But then you had other justices. You had Justice Sotomayor, for example, sounded very skeptical and very concerned about overturning this precedent and what sort of rule the court might be able to come up with if it were to take down this precedent from 1992.
And it's interesting because it's not quite ideological, right? I mean, if President Trump and Ginsburg are on the same page on this, then it's not partisan. Is it more regional?
Somewhat. I think the best way to think about it is what we've seen here in Congress, which is, look, Congress has had 26 years to try and address this issue and come up with some sort of national framework, and they haven't. And that's because they're divided. You've got Republicans divided between those who are more sympathetic to the concerns of states and retailers, and then you have Republicans who are anti-tax Republicans and are concerned about government reaching state governments reaching outside their borders to audit and to collect taxes. And that split in the Republican Party has been an issue. And then on the Democratic side, you've got most Democrats willing to impose some sort of national framework, but then you have some from states like Oregon and New Hampshire that don't have sales taxes that are also concerned.
Right. Well, the other reason I wanted to have you on today, of course, it is tax day, and you have a column here talking about how Republicans basically going into the midterm, they have the success, and then there's this Gallup poll that says that Americans are sort of divided about taxes. Republicans believe that 45% of Republicans think income taxes are too high. Just 2 years ago, in 2016, that number was 72%. Is that all down to them passing the law in December?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. That number's come down a lot. It's a similar drop to the one we saw in the 2001 to 2004 period after the Bush tax cuts of 01 and 03. Republicans clamored for tax cuts, elected a Republican president, Republican Congress delivered that, and then Republicans felt that correctly that their taxes were lower and sort of reached that point where they're comfortable saying that their taxes aren't too high.
Right.
And so yeah,
it's not like a natural thing for Republicans to say, but they certainly have had, they're going to run on that. I also wanted to ask you about this. It's tax day. A lot of people file electronically, but the website at the IRS is down?
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what the problem is. The latest word is it's some sort of hardware problem at the IRS that's causing them the inability to accept electronically filed returns. And most people have filed already or will seek extensions, but there are several million people. Last year, the IRS took in more than 17 million returns in the final week. So there's a lot of people out there trying to submit their returns. You can still do that. You can send them to TurboTax or H&R Block or your tax preparer, and they'll hold them. And then when the IRS opens the gates again, they'll be able to submit them. We just don't know when and exactly.
And no one would be penalized for this, right?
That's likely. The IRS hasn't put out anything formal about that just yet.
Well, if they decide to, come back here and tell me about it. All right, Richard Rubin, thank you.
Yep.
Fox News Alert. We have a press conference now on that Southwest Airlines flight. Let's listen.
Will be on the ground here soon, and ultimately it will be up to the NTSB to determine how this incident occurred.
Was the hull of the aircraft breached at all?
The aircraft did experience some damage to the fuselage.
Can you outline that? That there are passengers that are here being interviewed by the FBI. Do you know how long they will be here on the premises before the passengers go to their destinations?
We believe it will be a relatively short period of time. Again, our law enforcement partners are conducting interviews. That's entirely standard in an incident of this nature. Our goal, as well as the airline's goal, is to get those passengers on their way. We know they've had a tough day, so that really is what Southwest is working on right now, is getting through that and getting those passengers on their way. Again, I want to say thank you to the other airlines here, and everybody's really banded together to take care of those folks while they're in transit here in Philadelphia.
Can you confirm that one of the windows was broken through?
I can say that the aircraft did experience some damage.
What part of the aircraft experienced the damage? Was it the beginning, the tail, the part?
The fuselage and parts of the wings.
Have you seen the pictures on social media we're talking about, Commissioner?
I have. So that is the aircraft that you see on the news and on social media is the aircraft that was involved in this incident.
Can you tell us what broke through that window, Commissioner? Did something?
No, we can't. It really is too early to tell. I mean, that is why the NTSB has a team on the way here. Aircraft, as you can imagine, are complex pieces of machinery. I have to say as well that the flight crew did an incredible job getting this aircraft here on the ground. Any other questions about how this incident occurred and the status of the aircraft really will have to wait for the NTSB.
Can you talk a little bit about the minor injuries? You were saying there were bumps and bruises, bleeding.
I actually don't, besides minor, that's as much information as I have on the nature of those injuries.
Pilot a female, if you don't mind me asking?
I actually don't know the demographics of the crew.
We heard someone we didn't know if that was the co-pilot or pilot.
Do you know if the passengers were working together inside the plane to maybe make it safe while they were trying to land?
It is our understanding, and again, it's still very early, it is our understanding that the passengers on board of the aircraft, in addition to the flight crew and the cabin crew, did some pretty amazing things under very difficult circumstances. You'll hear more about that, I'm sure. That's still very new information. And that, again, that's not really our purview. That's something I'm sure will come out in the NTSB's briefings and report.
Is there any way we can hear more from the airline?
Like I said, the airline is firmly ensconced in our EOC, working with the other airlines and working with their headquarters to do everything they can right now. I think their focus is rightly on the passengers. So that's why they had us come down here and report on this incident. We did want to make sure that we got some information out. Hopefully the airline will be ready to talk a little bit more once we have that family reunification number in hand. But they're focused on that, and I think really focused on the passengers at this point.
Can you make the request for us to have some passengers in a state test before they depart?
That's not a request that we would make.
All the passengers remaining here want to go back to Dallas, or is something possible?
We're unaware of the flight arrangements for the passengers, and again, I think those are being made right now.
How are the passengers holding up, the ones that are?
Yeah, can you characterize their demeanor at all?
Well, I haven't seen the passengers who are, currently going through the rest of the process, but, I can imagine it was a difficult flight.
All right, that's a press conference in Philadelphia talking about that Southwest flight that very scarily had a window break open and a passenger almost pulled out, other passengers on the plane pulling her back in. We're going to learn a lot more about this for the rest of the day, so stick around for that. But also the president about to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and what it could mean for a meeting between Mr. Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Stay tuned.
Shepard Smith on the Fox News deck. We're expecting a news conference from the National Transportation Safety Board at the top of the hour about that Southwest Airlines incident. A couple of passengers say somebody almost got sucked out of the plane after an engine cover ripped off and knocked out a window. We also just heard one person in critical condition. The latest from the feds, top of the hour on Shepard Smith reporting. We'll see you then.
The adult film actress who says she had an affair with President Trump releasing a sketch of the man she claims threatened her to keep quiet about it in a parking lot back in 2011. Stormy Daniels discussing it earlier on The View.
I thought for sure he was going to say, hey, do you know where the such and such class is or what building is, whatever. And he had his hands in his pocket and he looked at my daughter, and I just remember him saying, like, oh, it's a beautiful little girl. I'd be ashamed if something happened to her mom. Forget about this story. Leave Mr. Trump alone.
Laura Ingle is here with the latest developments. Laura.
Hi, Dana. Well, Daniels and her attorney had a sit down with the ladies of The View this morning and went over a variety of things. She talked about her claim of being threatened in 2011, what her life is like these days, and why she was in federal court yesterday to watch the proceedings involving the man that she says paid her hush money in 2006 for having a sexual affair with President Trump.
I just wanted to make my presence known and wanted to make sure that people knew that I was taking it serious. I know that there was some flack because he didn't show up to court on Friday for his, and I wasn't sure if they were going to discuss anything particularly relating to papers in my case, and I just wanted to be prepared and get all the facts.
And Daniels and her lawyer also revealed a sketch for the first time of the man she claims threatened her in that parking lot in 2011 to stay quiet about the affair. Her lawyer, Michael Avenatti, is offering $100,000 to anyone who can identify this man. Daniels also was asked by the host why she never went to police when she says she was threatened.
I would have gone to the police and would have gone, okay, a man approached me. This is what he said to me. He told me to leave, leave Mr. Trump alone. And their very next question, the detective would have asked me, why would somebody tell you to leave Mr. Trump alone? And I would have had to answer that question, which was not public at the time. And I would have had to tell an entire police department, and police reports are public record. I know that for a fact. I had sex with Donald Trump. And then the whole world would have known.
And they do now. Michael Cohen was in court yesterday fighting for a motion to keep investigators from going through documents and electronics that were seized last week in his home and office that could pertain to his payment to Daniels. That request was denied, the judge saying the matter is moot because the evidence is not available to either side yet. Instead, she ordered, the judge did, the government to give copies of the evidence seized at Cohen's attorneys to Cohen's attorneys so that they can flag what they consider privileged information. And Fox News has just released the following statement on yesterday's revelation that Sean Hannity was a client of Trump attorney Michael Cohen. While Fox News was unaware of Sean Hannity's informal relationship with Michael Cohen and was surprised by the announcement in court yesterday, we have reviewed the matter and spoken to Sean, and he continues to have our full support. Dana,
Right,
that's
Laura.
the latest.
You've got quite an assignment there, Laura.
Yeah,
Thank you.
going
We
on.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, the leaders of North and South Korea set to talk next week. Up next, what impact today's meeting between President Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister could have on that meeting. Alert Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe meeting with President Trump any moment from now at the start of a two-day summit in Mar-a-Lago. This coming ahead of Trump's anticipated meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un and just days before a summit between both North and South Korea. So let's bring in Dennis Wilder. He's a former special assistant to the president and senior director for East Asian Affairs at the National Security Council. So ahead of these meetings, everyone starts to position themselves for what they want to get out of it. From your perspective, what does Abe want out of this meeting?
Hi, Dana. This is a very, very important meeting to Prime Minister Abe because he wants to make sure he and the President of the United States are operating from the same playbook on North Korea. One of the things that he's most concerned about is that the United States not cut a deal with the North Koreans on intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear weapons on them without cutting a similar deal on shorter range missiles with nuclear weapons that can strike Japan. He's also concerned that the subject of abductees from Japan to North Korea be raised by the president. You will remember that in a tragic story several decades ago, many young Japanese women were actually taken off the streets of Japan and made to wed North Korean men. The North Koreans have never explained that fully. They've never given a full accounting of those young women, and there are families in Japan who still don't know what happened to their daughters.
In addition to that, what do you think Abe is thinking about in terms of the security situation on the Korean Peninsula in terms of American troops there?
Well, what he wants to make sure of is that the United States doesn't begin to withdraw troops from South Korea prematurely. If the threat from North Korea really does recede because of a deal, then Japan wouldn't have trouble with that. But if the North Koreans are able somehow to get a deal where they don't have to do everything, they don't have to denuclearize, but the United States begins to look like it is lowering its guard in Korea and Japan, that's going to worry the Japanese a lot.
Last week, the president told his economic advisors to look into rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. This is the trade deal, also known as TPP, that he railed against during the campaign, but people are allowed to change their mind. Right now, you have new people in the White House, Larry Kudlow, John Bolton, and then Mike Pompeo at the State Department. They had all previously supported TPP before taking jobs with the Trump administration. And I would imagine that Abe would also like President Trump to rejoin those talks, if that's correct. I mean, of course, we're looking at a live picture there just before this bilateral summit to take place. Do you think that TPP is a win-win for both of these leaders today?
I really do, and I would look for the president to make positive comments about it. This would help Abe back in Japan, and it also helps the United States in dealing with China. One of the reasons, and a key reason to join the TPP, is it gives us economic leverage with the Chinese. And
Right.
at a point where we're trying to negotiate some new agreements with the Chinese, I think the president should reconsider the decision not to be involved in the TPP.
Well, that is coming up next hour. We'll have it live. Dennis Wilder, thank you. Going out of his way to make a teenager's day, why one NFL player went to a prom just last week.